Welcome to Aspen Ignites, Conversations to Build a Better World, a series from the Aspen Institute that brings together thoughtful people with diverse backgrounds and points of view. In this episode, Monique Miles describes her work with Opportunity Youth as director of the Aspen Institute's Opportunity Youth Forum. She speaks with Osita Nwanevu, contributing editor at The New Republic.
Monique, wonderful to be here with you today. So you are the director of the Opportunity Youth Forum. That's a phrase I haven't heard before, actually, Opportunity Youth. Could you talk about what that phrase means and what the forum does?
Absolutely. So Opportunity Youth are defined as youth and young adults between the ages of 16 to 24 who are out of school and out of work. Nationally, there are approximately 5 million youth and young adults between that age group that are out of school and out of work. And a couple things I'll say about just the name and the framing is our work, really, the Opportunity Youth Forum and Fund, supports communities across the United States to improve education and career outcomes for Opportunity Youth. Nationally, across that demographic, about 56% of those youth and young adults are youth of color. And within the context of our network, we serve about 77% of youth and young adults of color, specifically Black, Latino, and Indigenous young adults. And that framing, Opportunity Youth, has been very important to us because previously this population was referred to as either disconnected youth or dropout youths. And when we founded our program and our work at the Aspen Institute, we were deeply committed to not just reframing the naming of this population, but really thinking about what it would mean to take an asset lens to supporting youth and young adults who, when you interview them, are very clear that they're not disconnected. It's actually the systems meant to serve them, secondary systems, post-secondary systems, career pathways that may not be connected in ways that can meaningfully support these youth and young adults into thriving livelihoods. So that asset framing has been very important for us as we've supported communities to support these young people.
Wonderful. So concretely, you recently did this event in Texas with about 500 people. Can you talk about what that was like and what happened there?
Yeah. So we convened this national network across the U.S. that's comprised of 40 rural, urban, and indigenous communities working across system and sectors to improve outcomes for Opportunity Youth. And we convene that network in person twice a year to do a deep dive in learning across a range of issues that touch the lives of these young people. And what's probably most important to share is that young people themselves are at the center of everything we do. So whether that's convening our network or thinking about solutions on the ground in place, young people being at the center of identifying the challenges that they face and designing solutions are meaningful for them. So as we were preparing for our time in Austin specifically, it's really important to know that young people were a big part of us going to Texas, designing our convening in Austin. And really the purpose of that gathering was to exchange some of the most effective practices communities are using to improve outcomes for youth and young adults, again, with young people at the center of those solutions, while also talking through some of our national challenges right now around education, around learning, especially learning that's tied to racial equity or really thinking about how to meet the diverse and intersectional needs of young people. So convening in Austin and Texas more generally, because we support now 8 communities across the state of Texas, including rural communities and urban communities in Texas. Convening in Austin was really important to bring all of those places together to really think again about not only what young people need, but particularly in the state of Texas, what are some of the most important and innovative solutions that are improving outcomes for young people across a range of issues. So we spent time in Texas talking about immigration reform. We spent time in Texas talking about a lot of the policies that are tied to education and supporting young people as they transition from secondary into post-secondary education, and how particularly in the state of Texas, there are a lot of policies that many people in other places don't know about that can be used, public revenue streams that can be used to improve outcomes specifically for this population. So Texas and Austin was really important because we could bring so many partners across the state together and talk about some of the unique assets that may not necessarily be understood when people think about the work in Texas.
Right. So you said there might be about 5 million such youth in the country. I think about Texas, as you were mentioning, it's so diverse within the one state. You have people in rural communities facing their own challenges, people in urban communities. But sort of generalizing out to the extent that you can, what are some of the shared challenges that exist kind of everywhere for these youth and trying to integrate them into the economy?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, one of the most important barriers to name for this population is that they are 9 times more likely to live in poverty. And so, if you are looking through that lens and really thinking about what does that mean in terms of lifetime outcomes, that's probably the biggest barrier to just accessing opportunity. The second barrier that this population faces is that they are 4 times more likely to have a disability, a learning disability that has been unmet, well, I should say undiagnosed, and then not supported in a meaningful way. And then the third barrier is that they're 3 times more likely to be young parents. And so as you start thinking about not just what parents need, but two-generation approaches that are about supporting parents and also supporting their children at the same time, you need infrastructure to do that. You need solutions that have at least a dual intergenerational approach. And so for this population, those are some of the barriers that they face. So when we start talking about just innovations that we see are some of the most effective models, they really are designed to meet the range of challenges that young people face in a really intersectional and integrated way. If you talk to a young person is going to say that they do not live a single life issue. They face many issues. And so to meaningfully support this population of young people, it's very important to take an integrated approach. It's in a large part why we at the Forum for Community Solutions support an ecosystem of actors on the ground in place, secondary systems, post-secondary systems, the justice system, the foster care system, so that all together they are bringing their best assets in a comprehensive way together to improve outcomes for young people. And even while we were together in Texas, to your point, rural is very, very specific. Urban communities are very specific. And even a rural community will tell you, if you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. Some of our challenges are similar, but our context is so unique and so specific. So we try to spend a lot of time supporting the unique context of each place, while also thinking about those solutions that are not only intersectional, they touch a range of issues, but they can be implemented across a range of different types of geographically diverse places
Right.
in order to improve outcomes for young people.
So what are some examples of those solutions that you've already seen kind of work, maybe even just on a small scale, that you've been really inspired by?
Yeah, there are so many. Some of the best, most effective models for young people are programs like Youth Build, which is all about supporting youth and young adults to not only attain a secondary credential, but connect that into post-secondary education in a very seamless way with a range of wraparound supports, so transportation, housing, support for food, etc. That holistic approach so that young people can achieve education and also be connected to career pathways is the types of models. Youth Build is the type of model that we've seen that takes that holistic approach to supporting young people.
That's great. That's great. And so, as far as national policymakers are concerned, a lot of national policymakers come here to Aspen to talk about solutions to some of these kinds of challenges. Are there kinds of asks that you would want federal policymakers to think about when it comes to opportunity youth and the specific problems that this demographic faces?
Yeah. There is a lot, but I will start with two.
Sure.
And actually, this isn't just even specific to Opportunity Youth, because so much of the work that we do is about supporting communities so that they can work across sectors and they can work across systems to solve any challenge they face. And the truth is that the better a community can collaborate across sectors and systems, the more easily they can address pressing solutions. So a large part of how we think about this solution is just building infrastructure and capacity in communities so that they can collaborate. It just so happens we focus on Opportunity Youth as a primary issue, but a community's ability, again, to come together and be able to design solutions that bring the best possible assets from different sectors together is really, again, how communities not only get to greater outcomes, but more equitable outcomes as well. So thinking about federal policy, really thinking about how we can invest public dollars in local communities' ability to be able to collaborate across systems and sectors. There's very little money for connective tissue funding. And that would be critical because, again, whether we're thinking about climate change, childhood obesity, third grade reading levels, or opportunity youth, supporting communities with public dollars to be able to work across sectors and systems will help them solve a range of challenges. So that is probably the most important one I will name because it is essential to many of the challenges our country is facing right now. But then the second policy piece that I would say, specifically as I think about the populations that we serve, is needing to set aside public dollars that can follow these young people specifically through secondary education, into post-secondary education, and into career pathways. But what young people need is agency to self-determine. Here's the type of secondary institution that works best for me, because so many of the barriers they face is that many of our systems, the education system, was not designed with these young people in mind. So being able to say to a young person, what type of learning environment works best for you? And here's public money that is free to you that you can use so that you can choose the best setting, the best path that is most effective for you. And that can support you through post-secondary education and into a career pathways would help young people with agency, self-determination, building critical skills, and attaining credentials that are important to their future.
That's fantastic. I want to go back to that first thing you said because it was so interesting. Because I think that a lot of times when people talk about federal policy solutions, it's we need the public dollars to fund this specific program, and that's obviously very important. But you were talking about connectivity, the idea that public dollars should also be used to bring communities together, to network, and to integrate the kinds of policies that are already there on the ground and facilitate those kinds of connections. I think it's so important because disinvestment, is obviously geographically determined. Within a state, one community, one area can have a lot more resources than another. Within a city, that might be true. But yeah, I think talk a little bit more about where you see those divides really mattering when it comes to facilitating opportunity for these youth, when it comes to, the kinds of racial divisions that we see within cities and states, and how that matters.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, particularly for this population of young people, being able to be served meaningfully, being served well by a secondary system, be that high school credential, being able to find a post-secondary option that works for you, that meets your needs, that not just your identity, but your lifestyle. Like I mentioned, you might be a young parent, so you need to be able to go to school, and you also need your child to have a high quality educational option. So I think some of this is about being able to get to public dollars. If I'm understanding your question, I think some of this is about being able to get to public dollars that can really meet the needs, again, of this population, whether that's at the secondary level or the post-secondary level. Some of the most impactful solutions, the framing that we use, actually we borrow from John Powell. It's called targeted universalism. And so it really is about setting some universal goals, but then targeting solutions so that maybe a community is thinking, here is what the African American opportunity youth in our community need, or the indigenous youth and young adults in our community need. So part of the solution is being able to support these different systems that touch their lives to be able to use public revenue to begin to target solutions for very specific different groups, different types of identities that are connected also to their culture, invest in cultural assets, a cultural framing, and really value that. Invite young people to bring all of that into whatever experience they are choosing in ways that affirm their identity, bring confidence with the young person, and it also helps them to navigate, again, the types of systems and institutions that were not designed with a real intention around their identity, their lived experience, their the challenges that they have faced.
Yeah, that's another wonderful phrase, targeted universalism. So universal access, but a specificity about a particular community that money is being given to and serving. So I imagine you engage a lot with young people directly in your capacity doing this work. Are there stories that have really inspired you from them that really keep you going and motivate your work here?
Yeah. The two that come to mind are, so first and foremost, COVID was devastating and ravaging, right, to so many people around the globe. So many of the youth and young adult partners that we work with, in part because they are already on a path, they are already civically engaged, they spent so much time, especially at the very beginning of COVID, organizing themselves and organizing their peers. They did food drives, they did clothing drives, they spent time as we were understanding not just COVID, but some of the solutions, some of the safety precautions, even what was available in the community in terms of supports for COVID. They spent time translating that to different languages so that different populations that were impacted, but may not necessarily know how to access healthcare or how to access public benefits, could understand that based on their language and based on their culture. And these were just young people who felt like we have a very important role to play, because that's the thing about reconnection and designing pathways that speak to the lived experiences and identities of young people. It doesn't just affirm them. The young people we work with say, when I reconnect and my best friend sees me go back to school, my mom sees me go back to school, my cousin sees me return to school. Now my mom is looking into returning to college. Now my cousin wants to come to the program with me tomorrow. And so it has this ripple effect in the community. And we saw that during COVID, that as one young person would stand up, we saw this in New Orleans, we saw this in Philadelphia. I mean, we saw this in a range of communities, where Los Angeles, where they were self-organizing for themselves, their peers, and their communities. And so much of this was just born out of that sense of agency, that sense of purpose, that sense of activism that is at the center of what we are supporting young people and communities to do. And then the very last thing I wanted to say, the second example, separate from COVID, is that we've also been so fortunate in this movement. So we call it the opportunity movement. We've been so fortunate to see young people come up. So they're called Yelders. They call themselves young elders because they were young people, but over the past 10 years, they have these leadership roles. So many of them have become social entrepreneurs, and they have started a range of organizations responsive to the challenges either they were experiencing or their peers were experiencing. We have young people that have started organizations specifically around addressing homelessness in their community. We have a young person who has started an organization specifically to support the elderly in her community. And then we also have a group of young leaders that have come together. They were previously the National Council of Young Leaders. They rebranded themselves Opportunity Youth United, and they are doing everything, working on voter registration, community action and community engagement around policing. I mean, just a range of issues, but it's really peer driven, peer led. They're making their own decisions, raising their own funding, setting their own policy objectives. So there's just a range of so many examples that at the heart are not just civic engagement, but again, this sense of agency, and that together we can determine the outcomes of our communities. So many young people.
Wonderful, wonderful. So when you look ahead to maybe the next year at the forum, are there things that you're particularly excited that you see on the horizon that you can disclose if you're able to?
I'm so glad that you asked this question. So because of, I mentioned that 77% of the youth and young adults we serve are youth and young adults of color. Our work has also been about supporting them on a healing journey. Young people who have, again, experienced barriers to accessing education, accessing career pathways. And these challenges have been intergenerational. So they're the challenges that their parents and their grandparents faced. And really thinking about how intergenerationally some of that has been passed down to these young people. And young people living in communities where they face a range of challenges and also trauma. A lot of what has really been at the center of our work has been just supporting healing, community healing. And as we begin to think about what that's going to look like in the future, we have uncovered a large body of research, evidence-based practices that says at the end of the day, it's belonging, meaning, well-being, and purpose that when you integrate into these educational settings, career pathways have a outsized outcome on the lifetime trajectory of these young people. So not just the next year, but I mean, we are envisioning the next 10, 20 years of really beginning to integrate these types of practices, belonging, meaning, well-being, and purpose, into the systems that serve young people, the programs that serve young people, but most importantly, the narratives, the stories that we tell. I mentioned that asset framing in the beginning and how important it is. So we want to begin to tell a different story about belonging, about purpose, about well-being, and have these young people at the center of driving that work over the next 10 years.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Monique, it's been wonderful, wonderful to talk with you, and you're doing fantastic work, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
Thank you for this opportunity.